guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when clean water was suspicious, soap was a little terrifying, and the scent of your neighbor could knock out a horse. You're walking barefoot down a muddy medieval lane, trying to dodge piles of who knows what, while passing folks who haven't bathed since the last king was crowned. Chickens waddle past you. A pig snorts in a puddle. And somewhere behind a thatched wall, someone is definitely boiling onions. Or is that just the smell of unwashed armpits? You take a breath. Big mistake. Welcome to medieval Europe, where bathing is rare, suspicious, and possibly deadly. Yes, deadly. You've probably heard the myth that people in the Middle Ages only bathed once a year. It's not entirely wrong, but also not quite right. Tonight we're digging deep into what hygiene really meant back then, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this very well-scented journey. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you, other than the smell, is the idea that dirt isn't bad. In fact, for some folks, it's a kind of protective layer. See, many medieval people believed washing too much could weaken your body. The idea was that hot water opened the pores, which could let in bad air, miasma, and illness. Dirt, on the other hand, a nice, solid crust of it might actually keep the bad stuff out. You look around and notice most people don't seem bothered. They aren't scratching, they aren't plugging their noses. In fact, they might even find you're nervous, sniffing a little rude. Back then, being squeaky clean wasn't a badge of honor. It was often seen as vanity, or worse, moral weakness. A grubby face showed you were a hard worker, not some fussy aristocrat. Now that's not to say people didn't clean at all. They did. But their definition of clean was different. A good scrub with a rough linen cloth, maybe a rinse of hands and feet at the well, or a dab of vinegar or rose water behind the ears if you were fancy. That was enough for most days. Historians still argue whether medieval folks actually stank as badly as we think. Some evidence suggests their noses adjusted, or they masked it well with herbs and perfumes. After all, if everyone smells, maybe no one really smells, right? But here's the kicker. Even when people did decide to wash up, it wasn't always with soap and water. In fact, soap itself was a bit of a luxury, and we'll get to that in a bit. For now, just know this, you're not stepping into a hot bubble bath anytime soon. You're lucky if someone tosses a bucket of lukewarm water at you on market day. And when people did take full baths, it wasn't the soothing, candlelit ritual we imagine today. It was more like a splash and dash. A wooden tub, usually shared among family members or neighbors, filled with water hauled from the well or the river. You'd go in one after the other, eldest to youngest, cleanest to grimiest. Yes, that's where the phrase, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from. You'd be surprised how murky it got by the end. Still, even with all this grime, people weren't totally indifferent to body odor. Some wore pouches of sweet herbs around their necks. Others chewed on fennel or mint to keep breath fresh. And believe it or not, a common belief held that smelling bad could actually ward off disease. So the worse you smelled, the safer you might be. Comforting, isn't it? Imagine living in a world where cleanliness was something of a gamble. Wash too often and you're at risk of illness. Don't wash at all, and you're, well, medieval. It's a delicate balance, and one you'll have to get used to because your next proper bath might be next year. You duck into a stable to escape a sudden rain. The horses smell better than most villagers. You sit on a bale of straw, already itchy from your own grime, and wonder how anyone managed like this. But they did, for centuries. And not only did they survive, they built cathedrals, composed symphonies, and somehow still found love, even while smelling like fermented cheese. That's the strange beauty of the Middle Ages. Even when the standards seem baffling by modern eyes or nostrils, there's always a logic buried beneath. A logic wrapped in superstition, shaped by religion and sprinkled with just enough desperation to keep going. Now stay close. The bathhouse isn't far, but what happens inside might not be what you expect. You follow the smell of wet wood, old soap, and something vaguely sour down a crooked alley. Just ahead, steam curls from the roof vents of a low timber-framed building, the local bathhouse. Finally, you think, a proper wash. But as you step closer, it becomes clear. This is no spa. It's more like a medieval nightclub with less music and more nudity. The medieval bathhouse, you discover, is a social hotspot, literally. Men and women often bathe together, yes, together, in public facilities that blur the line between hygiene and, well, flirtation. You ease into the steamy room and see people laughing, chatting, even eating meals in the tub. Some are playing chess. One couple is suspiciously close. You shift in your spot, suddenly uncertain if this is the right place to freshen up or get scandalized. In places like 13th century Paris or 15th century Nuremberg, bathhouses were common, sometimes on every corner. They were called stews or badhus, and they operated much like restaurants, with menus offering hot water, clean towels, and, occasionally, a discreet side of company. You could pay for a private room or join the main pool, but either way, things got steamy in more ways than one. Not everyone was thrilled. The church, already skeptical of naked skin, saw these places as hotbeds of sin. Priests warned that physical cleanliness might tempt people into spiritual filth. Some even argued that public bathing made the body vulnerable to the devil. Of course, the devil was often described as showing up right around closing time. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse culture was truly as sensual and open as it appears in records, or whether moral panic exaggerated the whole thing. But one thing is clear. Bathing, for a time, was both ordinary and oddly luxurious. In fact, being seen at the bathhouse was a sign of social standing. The wealthy flaunted fancy towels, scented oils, and good soap. Yes, the good stuff, which didn't smell like smoked bacon. Nobles might even hire someone to scrub their backs and pluck out stray hairs. This wasn't just hygiene, it was theater. But your bubble is about to burst. By the late 15th century, things begin to change. A few too many whispered scandals. A few too many diseases blamed on moist skin and open pores. And worst of all, the arrival of syphilis in Europe, which bathhouses were accused of spreading like wildfire. Soon, many of them closed or turned into more shadowy establishments, and bathing went from fashionable to suspicious again. Suddenly, scrubbing yourself with a dry cloth in a candlelit chamber seemed like the moral thing to do. Still, you're sitting in this public bathhouse, unsure whether to dip a toe or run. A burly man next to you offers a bowl of stew, not the bath kind, actual food. He smiles, completely unbothered by your shock. For him, this is normal. He's probably been saving up for this one bath all month, maybe even the whole season. You decide to test the water. It's warm, though not exactly clean. Remember, there's no plumbing here. Water is boiled in huge vats, then poured into the tubs. Once it's dirty, it's scooped out, or just left until the next shift. You count at least 4 people sharing your basin. One of them is clipping his toenails. You try not to look. You glance up. The rafters are strung with drying linen. Someone has hung sausages near the stove. Children splash in the corner while a very old woman yells something about her hip. It's chaos, but there's a kind of charm in it. You're not just here to bathe, you're here to be part of it. This is where gossip flows as freely as water, where alliances are made, feuds thawed, and marriages arranged, all with a bit of toe scrubbing in between. And though the church scowls, most townspeople don't care. At least not yet. It's easy to romanticize the bathhouse. But remember, it's a flash in the pan. By the 16th century, many of these social baths vanish, swept away by religious reform, public health fears, and changing fashion. Cleanliness, paradoxically, becomes something done in secret behind closed doors, or not at all. You step out of the bath toweling off with something that feels like burlap. You're technically cleaner, though not in any modern sense. And you've learned something important. Even when people could bathe, they didn't always want to. Because sometimes being too clean came with consequences. The bathhouse may have been warm, but its fate was always hanging by a thread or a damp towel. You're still damp as you wander out of the bathhouse, the evening air sticking to your skin like cold porridge. The warm soak was a rare indulgence, but the moment you step into the street, you realize something crucial. You smell weird. Not bad exactly, just different. And everyone notices. Heads turn. A dog sniffs you suspiciously. One child actually holds his nose and whispers to another, "Congratulations, you've made yourself an outsider in a world that doesn't trust people who smell too clean. So what's the deal with soap?" You might think, hey, maybe if they just used some good, foamy, eucalyptus-scented soap, we wouldn't be in this mess. But back in the medieval world, soap wasn't your bubbly best friend. It was harsh, greasy, and occasionally considered dangerous. The earliest soaps were made with a delightful mix of wood ash and animal fat. That's lye and tallow, if you're curious. And yes, both are just as inviting as they sound. The mixture was boiled down into chunky blocks that looked more like hardened stew than anything you'd willingly rub on your body. You pass a merchant selling rough-cut brownish soap cakes at the market. They smell vaguely of burnt meat and something earthy. A well-dressed woman inspects one, frowns, and walks away. You can't blame her. This stuff might clean you, but it'll also strip your skin raw and leave you smelling like a smoked ham. Most peasants couldn't afford soap anyway. It was a craft item, often handmade, bartered for, or imported from distant places like Castile or Aleppo, if you were really fancy. Even when available, it was typically reserved for clothing or linen. Washing your tunic with soap? Smart. Washing your body? Questionable. There were even superstitions about soap. Some people believed it disrupted the body's natural balance. Others feared it could irritate the skin so badly that illness would creep in through the cracks. A few monks wrote that regular washing, and by extension using soap, could encourage vanity, pride, and worst of all, lust. You wouldn't want to get too full of yourself just because your elbows aren't sticky anymore. Historians still debate how widespread soap use really was in the Middle Ages. Some records suggest it was common in southern regions like Italy or Spain, where the climate made sweat more intense and olive oil-based soaps were gentler. But in northern Europe, it seems bathing was often just rinsing with plain water or wiping down with a damp cloth and a lot of crossed fingers. Still, people tried their best. Wealthy households sometimes flavored their soap with herbs or rose water. Some even imported luxurious toilet soaps in carved boxes. These were status symbols, not daily hygiene tools, more for showing off than scrubbing down. And for the rest, well, there were always alternatives. Ash mixed with vinegar, sand, even crushed seashells for exfoliation, if you were feeling brave or foolish. One traveler once claimed that desert nomads cleaned themselves with sand and camel spit. You're not sure if that's worse or better than the lye-fat combo, but either way, you're grateful for your boring modern body wash. As you drift toward a town fountain, you notice a young woman washing clothes with soap. She rubs it vigorously against linen, scrunches her nose, then dunks the fabric into the stream. The soap froths slightly. She keeps her hands out of it as much as possible. A man nearby watches, arms folded. "Don't use too much," he mutters. "Water's precious." He spits near your shoes. You nod politely and step back. Water and soap, you're learning, aren't tools of everyday luxury. They're complicated substances, wrapped in superstition and status. And more importantly, not everyone thinks they should be used. Because if cleanliness breeds pride and pride leads to sin, then maybe it's better to stay just a little dirty. That's the paradox of the Middle Ages. Even with access to some kind of soap, people hesitated. Whether because of scarcity, belief, or sheer discomfort, it just wasn't the daily ritual we now take for granted. You might rub yourself down with herbs or rinse your hands before supper, sure, but lathering up daily? That was for the foolish, the vain, or the dangerously clean. So if you're hoping to get your hands on a proper bar of lavender-scented delight, you'll be waiting a few hundred years. Until then, best make peace with smelling like everyone else, which at the moment is a pungent blend of sheep, ale, and don't ask. And besides, your hands are already red from that gritty little soap cake you tried earlier. Maybe clean isn't all it's cracked up to be. The sky has gone dim as candlelight flickers in the windows of the village around you. Smoke curls from chimneys, blending with the damp air. And you notice something odd. People are shutting their shutters, locking their doors, pulling scarves tight around their necks, as if the wind carries more than just cold. A toothless old man nods to you and mutters, "Bad time for washing this." You blink. It's barely chilly. But in the medieval mind, hot water meant hot trouble. See, the belief back then wasn't just that bathing was optional. It was that it could be outright dangerous, especially if the bath water was warm. The prevailing medical theories of the day were still rooted in ancient Greek philosophy, specifically the idea of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Yes, it sounds like a failed cooking show, but this was the foundation of health for centuries. Hot water, it was thought, stirred the humors, opened the pores, and when your pores were open, the body became vulnerable. To what exactly? To everything? To disease? To bad air? To evil spirits? It was like leaving your front door open during a thunderstorm of plague. This is why, despite all odds, many believed it was safer not to bathe, especially in winter or during illness. Cleanliness might look nice, but it left you weak, exposed. It made your blood too hot, and too much heat in your blood. That led to fevers, madness, and death. Historians still argue whether this belief truly kept people from washing, or whether it was simply a handy excuse during icy weather when no one wanted to undress. But we do know that medieval doctors, monks, and even nobles warned against overbathing. You picture a stern physician, quill in hand, scrawling something like, "Patient died from reckless scrubbing." You pass a wooden sign creaking in the wind. It advertises heated tubs for hire, though someone's painted an X over it in charcoal. Inside the building, the tubs are cold and empty. A woman pokes her head out the door, squints at you, then closes it again quickly. No one's taking any chances. Still, there were people who defied the fear. The brave, or perhaps just particularly smelly, would sometimes heat water over the hearth, strip down, and soak right there in the kitchen. They'd throw in herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary, not for scent, but because they were believed to have protective powers. Lavender was said to ward off fevers. Chamomile soothed madness. You half expect to see someone toss in garlic just to be safe. But even among the bold, there was caution. You never bathed alone. If something went wrong, if the heat got too much, if your humors went into rebellion, you needed someone nearby to rescue you, or at least throw on a blanket and pray for your soul. One curious fringe belief you overhear tonight is that bathing after sunset is particularly risky. Something about the body being more susceptible to ghosts or moon madness. Whether it was lunacy or pneumonia, you're not sure. But either way, it's enough to make you tighten your cloak. And when people did fall ill, they often blamed their last bath. Too much heat, someone would mutter. Or, he washed during a north wind. These explanations, while strange to modern ears, made perfect sense in a time without germ theory. You couldn't see bacteria, but you could feel a draft. And that was danger enough. You duck into a tavern to escape the wind. The fire crackles. A man nearby scratches his arm absently, then laughs with his friend about the fool who bathed during the equinox. Everyone around him chuckles. You laugh too, awkwardly, still damp from your earlier dip. At the hearth, a girl stirs a kettle of mulled ale. She smells pleasantly of cloves and wood smoke. You realize no one in the room smells bad exactly, just human, earthy, and no one seems bothered. That's the thing. In this world, smell is background noise. The real concern isn't the odor. It's what's lurking behind the warmth. A fever, a cough, a chill that settles in the bones and never quite leaves. So you start to understand. Bathing in hot water isn't relaxing. It's a gamble. And most people don't think it's worth the risk. You sip a mug of warm cider and let the fire dry your sleeves. The warmth is comforting, but you know you won't be dipping into a tub again anytime soon. Not in this century, anyway. You leave the tavern behind, your clothes now dry but still carrying the faint tang of smoke and wet wool. The stars are peeking out and the night feels quiet, heavy, like it's draped in an old, scratchy blanket. You take a deep breath, earthy, slightly musty, and still, no one smells like lemon shampoo, which brings us to the next curious discovery. Not everyone needed water to feel clean. You watch a woman on her porch as she rubs her arms briskly with a rough linen cloth. She's not washing. There's no soap, no water, no basin. Just a firm scrubbing as if she's trying to erase the day's dust by sheer willpower. And in her world, that's exactly what she's doing. This is what passes for cleanliness in much of the medieval world. Washing without water. It wasn't just about what you did have, it was about making do with what you didn't. Water might be scarce, or it might be dangerous, so people got creative. One popular method, the dry rub-down, a coarse cloth, often made of linen, sometimes wool, used to scrub the skin and remove surface dirt, sweat, and dead cells. Think of it like medieval exfoliation. It didn't exactly leave you sparkling, but it did enough. And hey, it beat dunking yourself into disease-riddled bathwater. Some households kept special cloths just for this purpose, even embroidered or scented ones if they were wealthy. For the poorer folk, it might just be an old tunic repurposed and rubbed to threads. You'd start with your hands and face, then work your way down. Always modestly, of course. After all, there were rules, even invisible ones. And if you really wanted to freshen up, herbs. People used them like medieval Febreze, sage leaves tucked into collars, lavender sewn into pillows, rosemary in your shoes. One knight was said to carry a pomander, a small ornate ball filled with scented herbs, on a chain around his neck, partly for the smell, partly to ward off plague. Multitasking. Historians still argue whether these dry methods actually worked in terms of health. But they definitely worked in terms of psychology. They made people feel cleaner, fresher, more dignified, in a time when dignity didn't always come easy. You pass a monk seated cross-legged near a small lamp. He's dabbing his forehead with what looks like a bundle of mint leaves tied with a ribbon. He looks calm, serene even, and though he hasn't bathed in weeks, he smells vaguely like tea. You nod at him, and he gives a small smile, as if to say, "See? No tub needed." Then there's the art of powdering. Wealthy nobles, especially women, used fine powders, chalk, crushed iris root, even powdered rice, to soak up grease and odor from the skin. It gave their faces a pale, velvety look that was both fashionable and functional. You might even smell faintly of violets afterward, assuming your powder wasn't mixed with ground-up bones or toxic minerals, which sometimes it was. One odd but real example. Some people used fuller's earth, a type of clay, to clean the skin. It worked like a primitive facial mask, absorbing oil and dirt. You smear it on, let it dry, then brush it off. Voila. Slightly less oily medieval face. Sure, your cheeks feel like a dry riverbed, but you look fabulous, maybe. As you walk into the village square, you notice a group of women brushing their hair, methodically, by moonlight. This wasn't just beauty, it was hygiene. Brushing removed debris, stimulated the scalp, and importantly, was soothing. Many people believed that maintaining your hair kept the head balanced, and in a time when imbalance was thought to cause disease, every little habit mattered. You remember something you overheard earlier? Cleanliness lies in the linen, not in the water. And it's true. Most people changed their underclothes far more often than they bathed. A clean shirt against the skin, that's what made you feel human again. Some even sprinkled their linen with herbs or a little vinegar to keep it fresh. You catch yourself sniffing your own collar, slightly sour, but not offensive. You'll allow it. In this era, being clean was more about visible tidiness than invisible germs, straight seams, unwrinkled fabric, clean hands, trimmed nails. If you looked neat, you were neat. Smell didn't factor in the same way it does today. In fact, if someone didn't smell at all, people might get suspicious. Too clean, too soft, possibly foreign, maybe even witchy. So you learn slowly that medieval hygiene wasn't lazy, it was strategic. It was shaped by fear, by resourcefulness, and by tradition. And it involved an entirely different tool set: cloth, herbs, powders, patience. You tug your cloak tighter and glance at your boots, now caked with a layer of honest medieval mud. Your face might be dusty, but you've rubbed it down. You've dabbed your neck with rosemary. You've brushed your hair with your fingers and swapped your linen undertunic. You may not have bathed, but in the eyes of your new neighbors, you're practically sparkling. The sun peeks over the thatched rooftops like a sleepy egg yolk, and the village stirs with slow-motion energy. You wake to the gentle rattle of carts, the clink of milk pails, and a distant rooster who sounds like he's not quite finished with his coffee. You stretch beneath a wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep and old dreams. You sit up, yawn, and rub your face. Then you stop, because something smells surprisingly pleasant. It's not soap, it's not shampoo, and it's definitely not deodorant. It's cloves and rose petals and something warm and sweet. A noble woman is walking past with her attendants, trailing scents like a medieval perfume commercial. She hasn't bathed, but she's radiant, and not just in appearance. In the medieval world, hygiene and the concept of cleanliness depended heavily on who you were. This morning, you're about to learn just how different life smelled depending on your place in society. You wander down a dirt path toward the fields, where peasants are already hard at work. A barefoot boy hauls a bucket of something unmentionable toward the manure pile. A woman nearby lifts her skirts and steps over a puddle while calling after her goat. The air is thick with the scent of earth, livestock, and hard labor. For these folks, there's no luxury in bathing, not even once a season, let alone once a week. Water must be fetched. Wood must be burned. Clothes must be scrubbed on stone slabs. And after all that, you'll just be dirty again by nightfall. So why bother? Instead, the peasant class relied on what you might call practical filth. They washed their hands and faces when they could, wiped down with damp cloths, and changed their linen when it wasn't too torn to wear. If you had a stream nearby, maybe you'd splash your feet. If it rained hard enough, you'd stand under the eaves and call it a bath. But a full-body soak? That was reserved for special occasions, weddings, harvest festivals, or the elusive midsummer bath. Historians still argue whether this once-a-year bathing idea was literal or exaggerated. But the truth is, for many rural folk, the once-a-year wash wasn't just folklore. It was logistics. You had to heat the water, find a tub big enough, and maybe even borrow soap. It wasn't laziness, it was reality. Meanwhile, back in the manor house, things were quite different. You step inside a noble estate and everything changes. Tapestries line the walls, straw is scented with herbs, and a servant is fanning away flies from a silver tray of figs. The lord of the manor might not bathe regularly either, but he has ways of smelling like he does. Perfumes were status symbols. And not just any old perfume. Some were made with imported spices, exotic flowers, or resins like frankincense and myrrh. Others used civet, a secretion from a small, angry cat-like creature, or ambergris, a waxy lump found in the intestines of sperm whales. Lovely, right? A noble woman might dab these scents behind her ears, onto her gloves, or even inside her undergarments. If you were really elegant, you'd have perfumed fans, perfumed wax seals, and perfumed coals burning gently in your fireplace. One wealthy duchess was known to scent her wigs with rose water every morning. You're impressed and a little jealous, but it wasn't just about perfume. Nobles had special hand-washing rituals before meals, often involving bowls of warm water infused with herbs. They had scented cloths to wipe their faces. They had gold or silver tweezers for grooming and enameled toothpicks. It was a kind of cleanliness by ritual, not immersion. Appearances mattered, and appearances smelled fantastic. Still, even here, baths were rare. A noble might have a wooden tub in their room, lined with linen and filled by servants, but it was an ordeal. Filling it took hours, draining it took even longer. And then there was the whole open pores make you sick thing. So more often than not, the tub sat unused, while the perfumed gloves did the heavy lifting. Back outside, you pass a traveling merchant in dusty boots. He's chewing cloves, likely to mask his breath. His face is smudged, but his tunic is bright, his belt oiled, and his coin pouch jingles. For the medieval traveler, a clean face and a clever scent could open doors, literally and socially. And that's the lesson you learn today. In a world without daily showers, hygiene was as much about perception as reality. A peasant might be spotless under the dirt. A noble might be fragrant but unwashed. It all depended on how well you could play the game of appearances. You look at your own reflection in a puddle. Your hair's a little wild. Your tunic has straw on it. But you've rubbed down with herbs, brushed your cloak, and your hands are mostly clean. For this time and place, you're doing all right. In fact, if someone sniffed you right now, they'd probably nod approvingly and offer you a place at the fire. The morning chill gives way to golden warmth as you follow a narrow path lined with yarrow and nettle, the soft crunch of gravel beneath your boots. Up ahead, a high stone wall rises, smooth, pale, and out of place among the timber and thatch of the village. You've reached a monastery. Inside, the air is hushed, heavy with incense and the faint rustle of robes. A bell tolls in the distance, marking the hour of terce. And in this sacred space of order and discipline, you're about to discover that even monks had to manage the messiness of being human. Welcome to the strange, scrubby world of monastic hygiene, where cleanliness was a spiritual concern, but bathing was something to be approached with hesitation, prayer, and, if you were lucky, a ladle of warm water. Monks were expected to be paragons of discipline, and this extended to their bodily habits. They lived according to the rule of Saint Benedict or similar codes, which laid out detailed expectations for sleep, food, silence, and yes, washing. Sort of. The rule of Saint Benedict, for example, mentions bathing only briefly, suggesting it may be permitted in cases of illness or when reasonably necessary. That's the monastic equivalent of saying, okay, but only if you're really, really gross. And yet monasteries were among the few places with the resources and structure to make regular hygiene possible. They often had stone-walled washhouses, pipes, channeling spring water, and scheduled times for ablutions. But this didn't mean long soaks with loofahs and chanting. It meant quick rinses, supervised scrub downs, and strict modesty. You peek around the corner of the cloister and spot two monks standing by a trough. One pours a small jug of water over his hands. The other rubs his face with a damp cloth, eyes closed in silent concentration. Neither is naked, neither is smiling. This is not recreation, this is ritual. Historians still argue whether monks bathed more frequently than the laity. Some suggest that weekly or monthly washings weren't uncommon in larger, wealthier monasteries, especially in warmer climates. Others insist that full-body bathing was rare, discouraged, or even prohibited. The truth probably varies from order to order, century to century, and region to region. One quirky detail you overhear from a passing brother is that monks often wash their feet as a spiritual exercise. The washing of feet mirrored Christ's own actions, and it served both as humility and hygiene. During Lent or major feast days, entire communities might kneel and wash each other's feet in solemn, fragrant ceremony. As for full-body baths, well, let's just say monks got creative. Some texts describe the use of dry baths, where a monk would undress, vigorously rub himself with cloths or straw, then don a fresh robe. Others speak of rubbing with wine vinegar, both to clean and as a kind of penance. And in a few very rare cases, monks were granted access to heated bathing rooms, usually small, dim, and monitored for any hint of immodesty or indulgence. You follow a narrow corridor and come upon a small room filled with herbs drying on racks, sage, thyme, marjoram, and bay. A young monk carefully crushes a bundle of lavender between his fingers and sprinkles it into a basin. You're told it will be used to scent the cloths for the evening's face washing. That's the thing. Monks didn't ignore hygiene. They redefined it. Cleanliness wasn't about pleasure. It was about humility, restraint, maintaining the vessel without becoming attached to it. They avoided scented oils unless for illness, and frowned upon any ritual that made the body too comfortable. Still, monks had lice. They had skin rashes. They suffered through fleas and fungal infections and likely spent long winter nights scratching under their woolen robes. They might fast for days, sleep on hard wooden boards, and bathe only when their superior allowed. And yet, even in this strict world, the body wasn't entirely ignored. It was a gift from God, after all. It just had to be kept simple, disciplined. Less pampered temple, more squeaky cartwheel. You leave the monastery with a strange sense of admiration. These were people who lived with purpose, even when it came to washing their armpits. And you start to see that hygiene wasn't a fixed thing, even within the same town. It changed depending on your role, your rank, and your rule book. As the bell tolls again behind you, you head down the path with a little more understanding and the faint scent of lavender clinging to your sleeves. The road hums beneath your boots as you leave the monastery behind, heading toward the open fields and the edge of the forest beyond. The wind carries the smells of damp hay, pine sap, and the faintest hint of something cooking, turnips maybe, or boiled cabbage, or socks. It's midsummer now, and the village is buzzing. You hear laughter and the clanging of pots. Someone strikes a tambourine, and as you near the square, you realize today's not just market day. It's something bigger, something wetter. It's Bath Day. Yes, the Bath Day. The once-a-year event that some villagers treat like a holiday, others like a mild punishment. Either way, it's a spectacle. Children are herded like sheep toward tubs. Elderly women hobble forward, clutching bundles of herbs. A group of young men jostle each other, shirtless and sunburned, already splashing around a half-barrel tub like oversized ducks. This, dear listener, is the fabled annual bath. Not quite a universal rule, but close enough to have earned its place in our imaginations. In many rural communities, midsummer was the time to scrub. You had warmer weather, easier access to water, and a rare moment between planting and harvest. What better time to wash away the winter? You sit on a low stone wall and watch as a group of women fill wooden barrels with hot water, heated in kettles over open flames. The tubs themselves range in style. Some are carved from tree trunks, others look like overgrown soup pots. And while there's definitely joy in the air, you also spot a fair bit of squirming. No one likes being the last one in. Here's the thing. The once-a-year label isn't a strict count. Some families bathed more often, especially if they lived near a clean stream or had access to a bathhouse. Others might go even longer if times were hard. But this midsummer ritual was a chance for the community to get clean together, sort of. Bathing wasn't private, it was communal, social, and, at times, hilariously awkward. You might be scrubbing your knees while the village blacksmith critiques your technique. A child might cannonball into your tub, one person might bathe, then the next person would use the same water, and then another. You get the picture. Historians still argue whether the once-a-year tradition was truly symbolic or simply survival. Was it a hygienic necessity, a superstitious cleansing, or just a moment of shared humanity? Maybe all three. But records do show that midsummer rituals often involved water, sprinkling it, bathing in it, even tossing it over livestock to ward off illness. You join the line. A boy ahead of you tries to skip his turn, claiming he bathed last harvest. No one believes him. The village elder waves a sprig of sage like a scepter and orders him in. He jumps with a splash and a scream. The crowd laughs. When it's finally your turn, you dip a toe into the tub. It's tepid. Not warm, not cold, just pleasantly swampy. You lower yourself in, careful not to disturb the soap scum clinging to one side. Someone hands you a cloth. Someone else drops in a sprig of rosemary for good luck. You've never felt less luxurious and never more alive. And while you're soaking, something strange happens. People start to talk. They share gossip, argue about whose goat ate whose vegetables, sing little songs. A baker tells a story about a chicken that once tried to take a bath and nearly drowned in a bucket. Someone hands around a plate of rye bread, and for a moment the water doesn't matter. This isn't just about dirt, it's about rhythm, tradition, the belief that once a year you start fresh, not just with your body, but with your place in the community. You emerge from the tub damp, red-cheeked, and blinking into the sun like a peeled grape. People clap, you laugh. Someone towels your head roughly. Nearby, a man is scrubbing behind his ears while lecturing a group of boys on how to attract a wife. "Start with a clean neck," he shouts. "Then maybe she'll forgive the rest of you." You wring out your tunic and feel, if not spotless, then at least reset. And as you walk back through the village, hair still dripping, you begin to understand why this once-a-year ritual stuck in the collective memory. Because in a world where bathing is rare, the day you do it becomes something special, something worth remembering. You may not bathe again for a long time, but today you were glorious. You wake the next morning with the sun poking through the wooden slats of a loft window, and something strange happens. Your skin squeaks. You rub your arm, and it sounds almost clean. The smell of rosemary still clings faintly to your hair, and for a fleeting moment you feel triumphant. But then you open the shutters and feel the air, sharp, dry, and chilling your damp collar in an instant. A raven caws overhead. A breeze snakes around your ankles. You shiver. It's autumn now, and the days are shorter. The nights stretch longer, and everyone begins to prepare for the cold. Piles of firewood stack up like sleepy hedgehogs. Barrels of apples and turnips are sealed tight. The smell of smoke becomes the new village perfume, and with it comes the ancient, bone-deep understanding. Winter is for stinking. You head to the central square and hear the mutterings. Too cold for washing now. Don't open the door too long. You'll catch death in the wind. And thus the bathing season closes. In the medieval world, winter was no time for a splash. Heating water became a full-day affair. Hauling buckets, feeding fires, boiling kettles. All of this just for a few minutes of tepid water and the risk of hypothermia. Most people decided it simply wasn't worth it. Even worse than the logistics was the belief. Opening your pores during cold months was thought to be incredibly risky. Remember all that poor paranoia from before? Well, winter made it worse. When the body was warm and the air was cold, people feared that evil mists or bad airs would slip right into you. The cold wasn't just unpleasant, it was lethal. Historians still debate whether this belief stemmed from real patterns. Did people get sick more after bathing in cold months? Or was it just coincidence? Did the shock to the system after a hot bath really open the door to disease? No one can say for sure, but the idea stuck. Better safe than soapy. Instead, people adjusted. The linen rub-downs continued, but now, by the hearth, with an extra layer of wool. Powdering with ground herbs became more common, especially for the face and hands. And anyone foolish enough to pour cold water over their head was considered either desperate or possibly possessed. One fringe practice you hear about is smoke bathing. Peasants and woodsmen would hang their clothes, or sometimes themselves, over the hearth, letting the smoke kill off fleas and soften the grease. You spot a shepherd dangling a tunic above a fire. It's charred on one side and smells like ham, but he beams proudly. There's also something called the cloak trick. People believed that wearing several layers without changing them created a protective barrier. Sweat, dust, and warmth all got trapped under your outer garments. Yes, on purpose, like a filth-based force field. Some even claimed it insulated the spirit as well as the body. You can't help but marvel at the medieval ability to turn discomfort into folklore. And if you had to wash, feet only, maybe hands, perhaps a face splash if the water wasn't frozen solid. Full body bathing, not unless you were sick, royalty, or halfway to sainthood. Even royalty, by the way, wasn't exempt. There are records of kings going whole winters without a single bath. Queen Isabella of Castile reportedly bathed twice in her life, though that's probably more legend than fact. Still, it tells you something about the attitude. The focus now turns inward. Fires, prayers, food preservation, and sleeping under so many layers that moving becomes optional. Scent becomes just another background note like wood smoke or broth, and nobody comments on it because no one expects different. One old woman tells you, God gave us noses, but also the wisdom to ignore them. Then she chuckles and feeds her cat, who looks like it hasn't bathed since the last crusade. You watch as people start to hibernate in their own way. Wool hats pulled low, scarves covering mouths, Bare skin becomes rare. Even animals seem to smell less because everything is just frozen. Frozen smells, frozen water, frozen intentions. So you learn to live with it. You find ways to adjust. A sprig of dried thyme in your sleeve, a dab of vinegar on your linen, and on especially dark days, a whisper of lavender saved from midsummer. You're not clean, but you're not alone in that. And honestly, after a few weeks, you don't even notice anymore. By now, the scent of smoke has practically woven itself into your skin. Your fingertips are stained with onion, dirt, and the faint sweetness of cider-soaked bread. The wind cuts sharper, and people move slower, bundled and bent beneath layers of wool and superstition. And just when you think things couldn't get any more suspicious about staying clean, you hear whispers in the alleyways and corners of the tavern. The plague has returned. There's no announcement. No town crier proclaiming doom. Just a slow tightening of shoulders. Fewer people in the streets. And every cough now followed by a side eye and a quickly drawn cross in the air. The Black Death is something of a shadow here, still lingering long after its worst waves. You'd think something so devastating, killing millions across Europe, might have inspired better hygiene. But the medieval logic, it went in the other direction. Instead of turning to soap and water, people turned away from them. The connection between bathing and disease wasn't what you'd hope. In fact, many believed that being too clean made you more vulnerable to illness. Why? Because of those treacherous, betraying pores again. Hot water opened them, and once open, they could inhale bad air, miasma, believed to be the source of plague and all sorts of maladies. A freshly scrubbed body was like a sponge for sickness. Better to be sealed up in a crust of protective grime. And for heaven's sake, don't touch the bathhouse. You pass one on your walk, a once thriving stew with shuttered windows, its stone walls now covered in ivy and silence. No steam curls from the roof, no laughter spills from the door, just a faded sign and a faint smell of mildew. Bathhouses across Europe closed in waves during and after the plagues. Not because they were too dirty, but because they were too clean. Historians still argue whether public baths actually spread disease. Some suggest it was the close proximity, the shared towels, the water left unchanged between patrons. Others think they were scapegoats, blamed by those who didn't understand how infections worked. But whatever the truth, the result was the same. The baths went cold, and so did people's trust in water. Instead, they turned to alternatives: perfumes, smoke, herbs. Plague doctors stuffed their bird-like masks with aromatic materials, lavender, rose petals, cinnamon sticks, to filter out the poisoned air. People carried pomanders or bundles of rosemary around their necks. They burned incense indoors and sprinkled floors with vinegar. Some even bathed in wine, not for luxury, but for fear. You meet an apothecary in the market who shows you a plague wash, a mix of vinegar, sage, and ground cloves meant to be dabbed on the wrists and temples. Keep the humors balanced, he says, tapping the bottle, and the air out. You don't ask how well it works. The rich began avoiding full baths altogether, too risky. Instead, they changed clothes more often, rubbed down with alcohol-based tinctures, or simply powdered their bodies into oblivion. A French noble once claimed he had not been washed since the comet appeared, as if abstaining from water were a badge of wisdom, or at least of survival, Even physicians advised against too much washing. Clean skin was seen as thin skin, vulnerable, permeable. It was better to be slightly crusty and alive than fragrant and dead. The cleaner you were, the more suspicious you became. You duck into a tavern and hear a woman mutter, "The boy next door bathed twice in a week. Now he's coughing." Everyone nods gravely. Cause and effect? Close enough. There were exceptions, of course. Some monastic infirmaries kept up regular bathing as part of healing, but even that was done with caution and prayer. One Italian physician claimed that cold baths could harden the flesh against the plague, while another warned that even thinking about bathing could summon illness. You choose to think about soup instead. Outside, you notice fewer children playing, more incense wafting from windows, and a lot of folks who look tired. Not just physically, but spiritually. Tired of watching, tired of waiting, tired of wondering whether cleanliness is next to godliness or the first step toward the grave. You pull your cloak tight and continue walking, realizing that in a world without germ theory, hygiene was more about belief than biology. People didn't ignore bathing out of ignorance. They made decisions based on what they knew or thought they knew. And when the plague came knocking, the tub became the enemy. So you decide to skip your next rinse, just in case. The rosemary sachet in your pocket will have to do. You smell like a forest, a bread oven, and possibly a scared goat, but you're alive. And for now, that's enough. The snow has fallen heavy and thick overnight, muffling sound and scent alike. The whole village looks dipped in flower, soft and quiet, like the world itself is holding its breath. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak and step into the pale morning, your boots crunching through the crusted path. The air is still, but the suspicion clings thicker than frost. You've barely gone 100 paces before a man passing with a bundle of firewood mutters, "Don't get wet. This is sick weather." You nod back respectfully, not wanting to invite further commentary. It's not a warning, really, it's a rule. Because when it came to illness, water wasn't salvation, it was risk. And the medieval medical system had plenty of reasons to fear moisture. By this point in your journey, you've noticed a trend. Everyone has a theory, and many of them involve invisible forces, vapors, and the constant worry that the body is a sponge for doom. But why were people so certain that bathing, or even washing too frequently, could actually cause sickness? Well, it comes down to the balance of the body, or more precisely, the humors. Remember those? Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. The 4 uninvited dinner guests. Medieval medicine revolved around keeping them in harmony. If you got too hot or too cold, or let your pores get too loose or too tight, you threw everything out of whack. Bathing, especially with hot water, was believed to unseal your body. It opened the doors, so to speak, letting in not only miasmas and vapors, but also disruptive forces that could shift your humors out of line. This wasn't superstition in their eyes, it was science. The kind of science that kept your neighbor from collapsing with fever after a long soak. You pass a physician's house, marked by a carved stick with a snake around it, and pause near the open shutters. Inside, the doctor is lecturing a nervous-looking patient who has made the grave mistake of washing their hair too thoroughly. The heat of the head is vulnerable, he says, with solemn weight, and moisture weakens the balance. He prescribes a damp cloth of vinegar and mint. No bath. Absolutely not. Historians still debate how much of this was driven by real observation. Did people notice a pattern of illness after bathing in cold weather or dirty water and draw the wrong conclusion? Or did they simply cling to ancient Greek ideas passed down from Galen, never bothering to question whether they were accurate? Either way, the result was the same. Stay dry, stay safe. You walk on and find a traveling friar giving a sermon at the edge of the square. His voice is thin but certain. The devil enters through the flesh when the flesh is idle, he says. And what is bathing, if not the idleness of vanity? He draws murmurs of approval. Even the chickens seem to squawk in agreement. There were even physicians who claimed that after a bath, the skin absorbed not just air, but thoughts, corrupted, sinful ones. One 14th century French text warned readers that excessive bathing could lead to disordered thinking, melancholy, and disobedience to God. You decide it's safer to just wear more linen. Not everyone was entirely anti-washing. In southern Europe, where the climate was warmer, people were generally a bit more relaxed about it. Roman traditions lingered there longer, and public fountains and bathhouses lasted into later centuries. In Italy, for instance, some cities maintained rudimentary plumbing systems that allowed for more regular washing, though again, this was more often about comfort than health. In colder climates, though, bathing in winter was an invitation to illness, or worse, bad luck. One curious belief you overhear from a merchant is that washing during certain phases of the moon could call death to your doorstep. You raise an eyebrow, but he insists. New moon bathers rarely see the next one, he says, wagging a finger. And let's not forget what passed for medical advice. Bathing while menstruating was discouraged. Bathing during pregnancy? Dangerous. Bathing after childbirth? Possibly fatal. You start to wonder how anyone ever got clean without fear of unraveling entirely. Instead, people adapted. They focused on the appearance of cleanliness, trimmed nails, neat hair, clean linen. Washing the hands and face became a kind of compromise. You'd look presentable without risking internal catastrophe. You watch a boy at a well, splash his face and scrub behind his ears with a cloth. He shivers but looks proud. A woman nearby nods in approval. Face washing is safe, she says. The Pope does it. That settles it. So you begin to see hygiene not as a matter of physical cleaning, but of managing the body like a fragile house in a thunderstorm. Too much water and the walls swell. Too little and the dust chokes you. You find your own balance, your own rules, passed down by whispers, caution, and maybe a pinch of inherited paranoia. The snow starts to fall again, soft and soundless. You pull your cloak tighter and feel the warmth of your own skin, sealed in beneath 3 layers of linen, wool, and quiet self-assurance. You may not be clean by modern standards, but here in this world, you're healthy, and that's what counts. The snow begins to melt. Slowly, stubbornly, the world exhales a foggy breath, and hints of green push up from the earth like sleepy eyelids. Spring is stirring again, and with it comes a familiar shift, not just in weather, but in scent. The air smells less of smoke now, more of mud and thawing hay, and something new tickles your nose as you walk past a silk-clad woman whose gloved hands glisten with oil. She nods as she passes. You turn your head, catching the lingering trace of violets and orange peel. She hasn't bathed, but she has perfumed. Welcome to the age of perfume, the medieval elite's lazy but lovely solution to body odor. Why bathe, after all, when you can simply outsmell the problem? Perfume wasn't just luxury, it was strategy. For those who could afford it, scented waters, oils, and powders became essential tools of hygiene and social rank. Nobles perfumed their gloves, their underclothes, their hair, even the walls of their homes. One French duchess reportedly had her chamber walls rubbed down with rose oil weekly. Not cleaned, perfumed. You wander into the workshop of a perfumer in town, a cramped space packed with bottles, herbs, dried flowers, and wax tablets. The air is thick with clashing aromas: cinnamon, lavender, musk, lemon balm, and something suspiciously goat-like. The perfumer doesn't look up. He's focused on a paste of ambergris and honey, muttering about ratios. Too much civet, and the bishop swoons, he says. Too little, and no one notices? Civet, you learn, is a secretion from the scent glands of a small cat-like creature. Musk comes from deer glands. Ambergris? Whale vomit. And somehow these strange ingredients formed the base of the most popular perfumes of the age. Mixed with floral waters, resins, and oils, they masked the human body with layers of illusion. Your armpits might be stewing beneath a velvet doublet, but to the nose, you smelled like paradise. Historians still argue whether perfume was seen primarily as a beauty product or a health tool. Many believed that strong, pleasant scents warded off disease. If bad air brought illness, then good air, perfume, could protect you. People hung scented sachets around their necks, carried pomanders, small perforated balls filled with herbs, and even had sweet-smelling wax balls sewn into their hats. Think of it as medieval aromatherapy, only with fewer spa playlists. The church had mixed feelings, of course. On one hand, fragrance was associated with holiness. Saints were sometimes described as smelling of roses after death, a sign of their purity. On the other hand, perfume used for vanity? That was a slippery slope. A clean spirit needs no scent, one friar grumbles in passing. But then you see him dabbing mint oil onto his sleeves later that day. Perfume also had its quirks. Some recipes called for crushed pearls. Others insisted on marinating rose petals in goat's milk. There's one particularly eccentric text that claims you can make your skin shine like glass by rubbing it with swan fat and elderflowers. You decide not to test that one. For those who couldn't afford perfumes, there were humble alternatives: vinegar steeped with lavender or thyme, crushed bay leaves, scented smoke wafted over clothing. Peasants might rub themselves with sage or rosemary after a dry scrub, hoping for a fleeting freshness. And yes, even onion water was used. Why? You're not sure. But you wouldn't challenge a woman holding a wild leek like a wand. You begin to notice that cleanliness in this world isn't about removing dirt, it's about managing perception. Perfume didn't just cover a smell, it replaced it, reshaped it, redefined it. The stink of sweat became the spice of musk. The scent of unwashed hair was hidden beneath bergamot oil and hope. You pass a nobleman who clearly hasn't washed in weeks. His fingernails are black crescents, his boots crusted with dried mud, but his embroidered cloak smells of sandalwood and crushed cloves. A woman curtsies as he walks by, and in that moment you understand. Scent is status, just like silk or silver. To smell good is to appear clean, even if you've never touched a bath. You adjust the sachet tucked in your belt. Dried lavender, a sliver of pine resin, and one desperate mint leaf. It's not much, but it makes you feel sharper. Sharper than mud, sharper than musk, and maybe that's all that matters. You continue down the lane as bees begin to hum again in the hedges. Spring is returning, but don't expect the baths to open just yet. There are still many scents to wear before you wash again. You cross the village border just after noon, the sun slinking behind thin clouds, like a cat ducking through curtains. The road turns rough and muddy as you reach the outskirts, the kind of place where proper stone paths vanish and the wind carries stories before it carries smell. You're not alone here, not by a long shot. A column of travelers stretches ahead of you. Pilgrims, peddlers, mercenaries, nuns, a juggler, someone pulling a goose on a string, and one very tired-looking friar attempting to sing hymns while clearly losing his voice. And what do all of these people have in common? Besides sore feet, they stink. Traveling in the Middle Ages was not for the dainty or the fragrant. These people moved from town to town, weeks or months at a time, with little more than a bedroll, a loaf of bread, and maybe a good luck charm. Bathing was not part of the itinerary. Water was either too scarce or too risky. Rivers were often filthy, public baths were closed or avoided, and stopping for a long wash might mean losing precious time, supplies, or your donkey. The smell of the road, therefore, was a badge of honor. A traveler's aroma was its own passport, a blend of sweat, wool, leather, pickled food, anxiety, and the occasional whiff of horse. You step closer to the juggler, and he offers a tired grin while tossing 3 apples. You return the smile, but step slightly back. His tunic smells like it spent the night inside a cheese wheel. Soldiers were no better. In fact, they were often worse. You pass a cluster of mercenaries at a roadside campfire, laughing over a shared flask. Their armor is rusted at the joints, their cloaks stiff with old grime, and one man appears to be eating soup straight from a boot. You don't ask. You don't want to know. And yet within this fragrant parade, certain habits still emerge. A merchant scrapes his boots clean with a stick. A nun rubs her hands with rosemary. One man, bald and sunburned, carefully wipes his face with a cloth, soaked in what smells like sour wine. Hygiene on the road was improvised, inventive, and often symbolic. Historians still argue whether travelers actually cared about cleanliness. Some say they did what they could. Others argue that survival simply came first. But one thing is certain: smell traveled faster than horses. Villages sometimes knew when strangers were coming because the wind changed. Children could identify different groups: monks, pilgrims, traders, by scent alone. In some towns, arriving travelers were offered scented cloths or vinegar washes before being allowed into the main square. A few even had designated stew streets, where visitors were encouraged strongly to rinse off before mingling. Not everyone listened. One record from 1374 describes a group of German pilgrims being refused shelter for smelling like damp wool and onions. Harsh. You approach a woman selling apples from a wooden cart. She covers her nose discreetly and gestures to a bucket of water by her side. "For washing?" she says. "1 penny." You hesitate. The water is brownish, possibly soup. You pass. Even in the great courts of Europe, scent etiquette was a thing. Foreign ambassadors would sometimes gift perfumes before meetings, just to ease the air. One English courtier once remarked that the French smelled of cloves and condescension. Another, visiting the Holy Roman Empire, claimed his host reeked of valor and venison. A diplomatic way of saying, "I need a window open." And yet, for all the stench, the road had its charms. The people you meet are real, honest, layered in more than just wool. Their smells carry stories of where they've been, what they've eaten, who they've slept beside or not, and whether they've seen rain or fortune. It's not pleasant, but it's human. Raw, sincere. You sit beside a fire that night surrounded by the chorus of creaking boots, bubbling stew, and a lute that's a little out of tune. Someone offers you a sip of something strong. You accept. Then someone else offers you a clove. Not to eat, just to chew. For your breath. You do that too. And when you lie back on your bedroll, the stars above blinking like uncertain lanterns, you find yourself surprisingly content. You're crusty, yes, slightly sticky, questionably fragrant, but you've joined the moving masses, and your scent has blended into theirs. You're no longer just a visitor to medieval hygiene. You're part of its perfume parade. By now you've become something of a connoisseur of grime. You can distinguish between peasant sweat and pilgrim sweat, identify who's been sleeping in hay versus who's been sleeping in straw, and detect a faint note of sheep lard from across a stable yard. You've gone nose blind in some respects. But that doesn't mean you've stopped noticing. It means you've adapted. But as you follow the winding road into a newer part of town, past scaffolding, stained glass workshops, and freshly laid stone, a new scent reaches you. Soap. Not the rancid animal fat kind from your first days here, but something gentler, lighter, almost floral. You round a corner and find yourself in a small square where a young apprentice is pouring water into a basin set beside a chair. The sign above reads, "Bathing Chamber. Scented washes available." And that's when it hits you. Something's changing. You've arrived in the early stirrings of the Renaissance. The old world, with its fears of bathing and mistrust of moisture, is starting to loosen its grip. Not overnight, of course. Tradition sticks to people the way old oil clings to a tunic. But ideas are shifting. And with them, so is hygiene. You peer through a window and see a woman applying something to her face from a small ceramic pot. "Rose cream," she says, "to soften the skin." Her hands are clean, her hair is combed. You can't help but stare. The revival of interest in classical knowledge, the works of Galen, Hippocrates, and Arabic scholars like Avicenna, has led to a curious twist. Instead of rejecting bathing, physicians and scholars begin to reinterpret it. Baths aren't dismissed outright, they're recontextualized. Warm water in moderation can be healthy. Herbal infusions might balance the humors. Clean linen becomes a marker not just of decency, but of refinement. Historians still argue whether this Renaissance shift was widespread or limited to the educated and elite. But there's no doubt the conversation is changing. Cleanliness becomes associated not only with piety, but with learning, elegance, even virtue. The body becomes something to admire, to maintain, rather than just endure. You find a barber surgeon's shop, and inside, a young man is being shaved while another receives a vinegar wash to the scalp. The tools are clean, the cloths rinsed between uses. There's even a bowl of rosemary water steaming on a nearby shelf. You suddenly feel very aware of your own socks. And then more subtle signs. Public fountains being cleaned, water carriers offering fresh barrels, even the occasional bathhouse reopening under strict regulation, single gender hours, better ventilation, linen towels changed daily-ish, and prices doubled to discourage riffraff. A fresh start in a sense, but let's not get carried away. You still smell plenty of suspicion, A butcher mutters that only southern dandies waste water on their knees. A laundress tells you she knew a man who died after soaking too long in a tub of wine. A friar shakes his head at these modern habits before adjusting his heavily scented scapular. It's a transition, not a transformation. For every noble embracing the Roman-style bath, there's a grandmother warning her grandchildren not to wash on Wednesdays. But the momentum is there. People are talking about soap, about steam, about bodies not as vessels of sin, but as instruments of health. One scholar you meet shows you a recipe book, not for food, but for hygiene. It contains instructions for tooth powders made with crushed eggshell and mint, oils infused with lemon peel, even guidelines for cleaning fingernails. Fingernails. You flip a few pages and find an entry titled "The Morning Water," which suggests rinsing one's face upon waking, then dabbing it with a cloth soaked in lavender. It clears the mind, it claims, and keeps the bile in check. You're sold. A young woman nearby offers you a sprig of thyme wrapped in linen. "For your sleeves," she says. It leaves a trail. You're not sure what she means, but you tuck it in anyway. The scent follows you as you walk. That night at an inn with freshly washed sheets and a bar of real Castile soap resting beside a basin, you reflect on how far you've come. Not just in distance, but in the evolution of how people thought about filth and freshness. You're still not bathing daily. No one is. But you're seeing the very start of something new. An era where water is less feared, where soap is a craft, and where a good smell might mean more than a good excuse. The Renaissance doesn't erase the past. It builds on it, slowly, unevenly, sometimes with a faint whiff of goat. But still, it builds. You wake to birdsong and sunlight drifting lazily through a gauzy window. The air is warm, sweet, with the scent of wildflowers and, miraculously, nothing else. You stretch in a bed that doesn't smell like goat skin or moldy straw, but like soap, wood polish, and sunshine. It's the late 17th century now. Time has turned another corner, and your medieval tour of dirt and doubt is beginning to feel like a distant, grimy memory. The chamber pot's still under the bed, of course, but there's a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand, a comb, a linen towel, and tucked neatly beside the basin, a sliver of hard soap, smelling faintly of almond. You've arrived at what some now call modern cleanliness. Not quite daily showers yet. No hot plumbing, no loofahs, no 7-step skincare routines. But the tides have shifted. Permanently. Outside, a boy fills buckets at the village pump, whistling a tune. 2 young girls splash their faces from a shared bowl, giggling. A man in a waistcoat nods to you as he adjusts his cravat, his cheeks clean-shaven, his hair powdered and tied back. The stink is fading, slowly but surely. By the 18th century, soap production has improved. Olive oil soaps from Castile are now prized across Europe. Fragrant soaps become accessible to the middle class. And doctors, yes, actual physicians, are increasingly promoting the virtues of cleanliness, not just for vanity, but for health. Washing becomes habit, fashion, even identity. You visit a modest town bathhouse. No scandal this time. Men and women have separate hours. The tubs are smaller, the water cleaner. The superstition has faded into background grumbling. And now, bathhouses aren't a den of sin. There's something like a community center with better plumbing. Historians still debate when exactly daily bathing became a norm. Some say it didn't truly arrive until the 19th century with industrial soap and indoor taps. Others argue it crept in during the Enlightenment with its love of reason, routine, and eau de cologne. But here and now, in this liminal space between eras, you feel the difference in your bones. People want to be clean now. Not just smell clean, be clean. A merchant tells you proudly that he scrubs with soap every Sunday. And on Wednesdays, if my wife nags me, a housemaid soaks her feet each night after chores. Children are taught to wash their hands before meals. You're seeing habits form that will echo down the centuries. But here's the curious thing. The shift isn't just physical, it's moral. Where once dirt was piety, now dirt is neglect. Where once filth was humble, now it's suspicious. Cleanliness is godliness again, but in a fresh suit with pressed cuffs and a polite cough. You pass a row of new buildings with drainage gutters. Water flows freely down narrow streets. No more tossing slop from upper windows. No more walking with a handkerchief over your nose. People are still imperfect, but they're trying. And that effort perfumes the air more than rosemary ever could. You visit a print shop and find a pamphlet titled The Virtue of Water, a guide to health and cleanliness for the modern gentleman. Inside are tips on face washing, nail scraping, and how to freshen your breath with cloves or fennel. No mention of miasma, no mention of humors, just simple grounded advice. You buy a copy. That night, as you sit beside a small fire with your feet in a tin basin and your sleeves rolled up, you look back on the long, messy, sometimes stinky road that brought you here. You remember the once-a-year baths, the vinegar wipes, the fear of wet skin and open pores, the days when perfume did the work of soap, and you marvel at how far people have come, not because they suddenly discovered the truth, but because they never stopped questioning, slowly, cautiously, even grudgingly. Even progress is like that. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It trickles in like bath water under a splinter.